Hi, I'm Jamie, and these are my first impressions of NieR Automata.
Heavy damage and top legal
There's an old saying, Jack of all trades, master of none. This can't really be applied to NieR Automata though. It's the most gamey game you'll ever play. It makes no bones about being a video game, nor does it ever really try too hard to immerse you in its world. It's clear going in that this isn't a story of our future. It's the future of a parallel dimension that sprung up from ours somewhere around the events of the very first Drakengard game. I'll put more information in the description below. This self-awareness means that the game's creators haven't been shy about throwing almost literally every type of gameplay at NieR Automata. One moment it's 3D action adventure, then it's a bullet hell shooter, then a top-down hack and slash. There are shades of R-Type, Mega Man, Asteroids and Zelda. You'll notice old school JRPG elements, character leveling and weapon upgrades, crafting and fishing, all in a new school open world environment. Now, all of this might sound like it'll make for a muddy, uneven and maybe a bland experience, but while some elements may not be as strong as others, the whole of NieR Automata is so much more than the sum of its parts. Right from the off, you're treated to a glimpse of the unforgiving and brutal nature of the future that you'll find yourself fighting in, as all of your squad mates are killed off at the start of an opening mission that serves double duty, as it teaches you the majority of the game's basic controls and mechanics, as well as throwing you headlong into a practically self-contained story, which players of the game's alpha test will be familiar with, and gives you a good idea of what our protagonist will be up against for the rest of the game. For those of us who haven't already tasted the fruits of Platinum Games' labour, this 30-minute introduction is an action-packed thrill ride that works better than almost any other video game prologue I've ever played. It doesn't outstay its welcome either, and by its tragic end you'll feel like you've already played an entire game when, in reality, this is only the beginning. This is a first impressions video and I've only played NieR Automata for a few hours, but I'm already incredibly impressed. After that opening blast, the game slows down for a time, easing you into the wider ramifications of your actions in the prologue, before introducing you to the game's open world element and the possibly first, I'm not sure, hub area. You'll meet other friendly characters and run a couple of errands before finally heading out on your next main mission. While the open world is fairly sparsely populated at the start, I found it less of a hindrance than in other RPGs. The crumbling buildings of this far future Earth create blockages that you'll have to work your way around or through, creating something of a maze-like feel. And it's often in the fairly open spaces between the tumbled skyscrapers and ruined bridges of the old city that most of the combat takes place. I've never found myself outmatched on normal mode, and in the city the clusters of enemies have been just the right size to provide a fun break in the travelling without waylaying you for too long. Combat itself is incredibly good fun. Swinging swords and firing guns is nothing new in video games, but the introduction of the pod in NieR Automata means that you can now do both simultaneously, even if you're a ham-fisted buffoon like I am, without ever breaking the combat flow. Your pod is your ranged weapon and your character 2B is the hacker and slasher. While the pod will basically fire in whatever direction you're facing, you can lock onto targets to focus your attention more fully upon them. 2B can still move while the pod is firing too, so you can have all the jumping, dashing, sword swinging fun you want, and keep up a healthy barrage of gunfire, which is especially useful when your machine enemies start pumping out screen-filling numbers of energy balls which by themselves won't pose much of an issue, but together can deplete your health bar quite rapidly. Perhaps the best thing about the combat though is that there's no stamina gauge. You don't have to time attacking and dodging, you don't have to back off and recharge, you can spend as much time dashing about, attacking, running around, firing from afar as you want, and it's that sense of liberation from what is swiftly becoming a norm in the more mature style of video games that makes NieR Automata's combat a joy to partake in. As you progress through the game, you'll be able to upgrade 2B by means of traditional levelling through experience gains and by the use of plug-in chips, items that you can buy or find in the world that will slightly upgrade your Android capabilities. Chips cover a wide range of areas too, from offensive buffs and elemental damage to faster health regen and greater resistances to certain types of attack. Possibly the strangest but also one of the more compelling uses of chips is to affect what 2B, and by extension you, can see on the HUD. Chips exist that lets you spot fishing grounds, track EXP gains and even hide certain HUD elements when they're not in use. It's important to remember this too, as you're limited to how many chip slots you can fill unless you buy an ever increasingly expensive expansion port, so if you want to get a boost to damage, you're able to remove the minimap chip or the chip that keeps track of damage dealt to make room for it. It's not only 2B who can be upgraded either. You can purchase or find new programs for your pod too, turning it from a machine gun into a highly powered sniper or a close combat shotgun. NieR Automata really does go out of its way to let you play the way that you want to, so that you can experience the game in a style that suits you. So far, I've eluded talking about one of the most important aspects of NieR Automata, the story. Primarily because I really don't want to spoil this for anyone, and right from the off, NieR's story is interesting enough that people should want to experience it for themselves, rather than have me spell it out for them. True, I've not really uncovered a great deal about NieR's plot, but even in such a short space of time, I feel comfortable in saying that the story is already presenting me with ideas that other, lesser games might not get around to shamefacedly suggesting until the very end. The amount of themes packed into just a few short hours leaves me in no doubt that I'm going to have my understanding of what story can be in a video game rocked by the end of my journey in NieR Automata. So far we've been talking almost exclusively about the good, and while I'd like that trend to continue, NieR Automata isn't entirely without its problems. The biggest issue thus far in my playthrough has been with the game's camera. Often in close quarters combat it's difficult to track your enemies as 2B seems able to move much faster than the sluggish camera can, leading to situations where all of the enemies are behind the camera and you've got no idea what any of them are doing. This only really becomes an issue in the 3D action scenes. The camera pulls far enough out to never be a hindrance in the side-scrolling or top-down modes, but as these are often the most frenetic and otherwise enjoyable, it's an issue that you won't be able to overlook when you come to play the game. Now, the Drakengard series has often been accused of not really pushing any boundaries in terms of the visuals, and some games in the series, including the original NieR, have been described as being pretty underwhelming to say the least from a graphical standpoint. While NieR Automata isn't nearly that bad, it does leave some to be desired when it comes to the game's visuals. Some scenes are rather pretty, but the city as a whole is a little bland, and not in a good environmental storytelling way either. Some of the NPC character models too are, well, a bit odd. Tiny heads on bulging necks abound, and it sometimes feels like the game is trying to pull a perspective trick on you, making you think that these teeny-headed weirdos are actually super duper tall or something. Graphics aside, 2B and 9S's designs are spot on, and it's absolutely inevitable, despite how well or otherwise NieR Automata does, that we're going to get plenty of Android cosplay over the next few seasons. That could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you feel about cosplay. That last sentence sort of plays into my biggest fear for the game though. NieR Automata's release date being what it is, it's probably going to be passed over by most gamers, particularly us in the West, for Horizon Zero Dawn or Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild if you manage to get your hands on a Switch. These highly marketed and much more visible games are more than likely going to overshadow what I'm already considering to be an incredible gaming experience, and it'd be a real shame if NieR Automata is forever consigned to the status of cult classic, when in reality this challengingly dark and unashamedly gamified experience deserves so much better than that. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on those notifications to keep up to date with all the gaming news and reviews with GameSpew. I've been Jamie, thanks for watching.